Who doesn't like a good video game remake? What could be better than taking a game that you already loved, whether it was a game from your childhood that holds a lot of nostalgia, or a game that you never got to experience when it first came out, and making it better? This concept sounds foolproof on paper. Everybody wins. But what about in reality? Are video game remakes actually a good thing, both for the market and the consumer? Or is remaking video games a practice that just needs to die already in the current age of gaming? The answer to that last question is, of course, no. Absolutely not. There is still plenty of room for video game remakes in today's market. Remaking an old game can really provide a lot of really great things. They can give a facelift to a cherished childhood game. It gives developers a chance to go back and fix some of the mechanical issues that a game had during its release. And, perhaps best of all, it can provide a simple way to allow new gamers to get caught up in franchises. As someone who didn't really play a ton of video games until this year, one of the greatest uses of remakes is when companies release a collection or legacy edition of a series containing several entries of that franchise. There are several collection series that either have or will be coming out in recent times, a lot of them for the previous generation of console gaming. Just to name a few, there's Halo the Master Chief Collection for the Xbox One, the Prince of Persia Trilogy HD for the PS3, Metal Gear Solid the Legacy Collection for the PS3, and in just a few days, Uncharted the Nathan Drake Collection will be released for the PS4. I even have a couple of collection editions in my own personal video game library, with the Sly Collection and the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. These collection editions really have a lot of great benefits to them. For starters, some games, such as the Prince of Persia games as well as some of the Metal Gear games, are released in HD, which fixes up a great number of smaller issues that may have been present in the original copies of the game. Graphical shortcomings, audio issues, mechanical snafus, those sort of things. But by far the best part of these remakes is that it just makes it a lot easier for new gamers to catch up on games that came out quite a while ago that we never got the opportunity to play. Let's take a look at the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition, just for an example. The game, which was released for the GameCube, contains 4 entries to the series: the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. These 4 games originally were for 2 different systems, with the original Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2 being made for the NES, and Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask being released for the N64. Without the Collector's Edition, I would have had to find old cartridges for all 4 games, as well as buy an NES and N64, as well as controllers and any extra accessories for each console. But with the Collector's Edition, all I need is the one game, a GameCube or a Wii, and a GameCube controller and a memory card. It's just so much easier to play these games that are so old at this point. The same is true for other series, especially the Metal Gear series, which has released games for numerous different consoles. Owning the Legacy Edition is just a much easier way to get caught up in the series, so that when a new game such as the Phantom Pain comes out, you aren't diving into the end of the franchise. But how about games that are remade without being a part of a collection of games? Obviously, a collection of games contains quite a bit more content than a single game being remade, but there is still a lot of value when it comes to simply releasing a remake. The Legend of Zelda franchise is no stranger to this. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask have both been remade for the 3DS, A Link to the Past was ported to the GBA with 4 swords added, and Wind Waker was remade as Wind Waker HD for the Wii U. All of these remakes actually came with some sort of significant change, however. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask didn't age particularly well, with extremely outdated graphics, as well as a very rigid camera, shaky controls, and several other issues. The 3DS remakes for each of these games clears up so many of those issues, and takes games that were considered to be masterpieces upon their release and made them even better. I don't know if A Link to the Past was much more than a simple port, but it at least added a whole new, albeit short and multiplayer only, adventure. And while I am on the fence about whether or not Wind Waker actually warranted a remake, simply because the original has aged so spectacularly well, it is over 10 years old, and it did fix some things, such as the Triforce Shard fetch quest. Or how about the original Resident Evil, which is considered one of the best horror games of all time? Turning 20 next year, this game has been remade twice now. While being re-released raises some eyebrows, I think it's understandable that a game that was such a critically acclaimed work in 1996 has been remade a couple of times to keep up with the new abilities of video game software. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are remakes of games that came out 12 years ago, and Nintendo included the brand new mechanic of Mega Evolution, rather than just releasing a better looking copy of the originals. And these are all fine and dandy, but in the current state of video games, remakes have become somewhat of an issue for two reasons. First off, all of a sudden, we're getting several remakes or definitive editions of games that are only a few years old to begin with. I mean, I can understand why video games that have aged quite a bit need to be remade, but games that came out in 2012 or 2013? Dishonored, the definitive edition, was released for PS4 and Xbox One less than 3 years after the original one came out. The Last of Us Remastered came out for the PS4 about a year after originally coming out. Tomb Raider 2013 had a definitive edition less than a year later, and Devil May Cry also had a definitive edition a couple years after release. Now make no mistake, all of these remakes and definitive editions had their upgrades, mostly FPS and graphic quality upgrades, coming with all the DLC, and essentially being ports to the next-gen consoles. But it still just doesn't feel like it's much more than developers trying to pull a fast one and get the consumer to buying almost the same game with marginal differences twice. Even more troubling with remakes in the current state of gaming is that they have almost replaced brand new games for this gen of consoles. The Last of Us Remastered is the 5th highest selling game on the PS4. Wind Waker HD is the 8th highest selling game on the Wii U, and is behind a lot of games like Mario Kart, which typically don't differ a whole lot compared to the previous games in the series. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire combined are the 3rd highest selling on the 3DS, and even if you were to divide that number in half, they would still come in at 8th and 9th. Ocarina of Time 3D comes in at 11th, and Majora's Mask 3D, which came out just this year, is at 20th. While there is definitely something to be said about the quality and love for these remakes, there is also something to be said for the fact that these remakes have sold more copies than most of the new titles for these systems. We seem to have fallen into an awkward rut where developers don't always feel the need to look for new games, but instead release remakes or remasters as the big hitter games for their consoles or systems. To be fair, they certainly sell well, so it's hard to blame them for this practice. But while remakes will forever be loved, as long as they are good, the current state of the nation needs a change. Remakes need to once again serve as a nice refresher of the past, rather than being the AAA titles of today. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Now that I've talked to you to death over my opinion for several minutes, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, if you have any other topics you'd like me to cover, leave that in the comments as well. If you'd like to hear more from me, why not check me out on Twitter by clicking the link in the description. If you want to read the actual article that I wrote before making this video, or if you want to check out some of the reviews I've written for games, check out my blog, which is also in the description. Thanks!